Hello, tribe. Welcome, hopefully welcome back to Gunfighter Life, where we get together, where we gather around this virtual campfire and talk guns, tactics, gear, gunfighting, the right way, with God Almighty at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world, first-hand experience. I am your host, Michael Milito. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I've also been a professional gunfighter most of my adult life. Military, 2 branches. Combat veteran. Law enforcement, LAPD, state rifle and pistol champion a few times over. Private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. Professional firearms instructor, etc. I give all the glory to those things for God Almighty. For I could do nothing apart from Him. Without Him, I can do nothing. Without Him, I would have nothing. So I just do that to establish some street cred. That's a very abbreviated version of the bio, as you might surmise. Many things that are not in there or that could be expounded on. But let's talk guns. Let's talk guns that punch above their weight class, that wrestle above their weight class. If you don't know, I don't often talk about it in the bio, even the longer ones. I wrestled. I wrestled in high school. I did quite a bit of street fighting and ground fighting after high school. I don't know, I'm not like a UFC fighter, but more than most. If you're familiar with the term wrestling or fighting above your weight class, usually UFC, wrestling, boxing, they have weight classes. Sometimes your coach will make you wrestle up to make you better, to fight bigger than your weight class. How does that apply to guns? Well, perhaps like the best cream of the crop combat handgun, fighting handgun, duty handgun, competition handgun of our time is an STI 2011. And they know it. They have a price tag that reflects it. When I bought my last STI before they became Staccato, I believe they were around $1,500. Now I know inflation is high, but for a lot of the Staccatos now they're like $4,000. What can we get that punches up into that weight class? Maybe not as good, but really punches above its weight class, that fights bigger than it is, bigger than the price tag would suggest, maybe bigger than the actual weight of the firearm suggests. That's what we're going to talk about today. Kind of a new take, not necessarily a value-based firearm. So price point is not necessarily the main motivating factor. There are some good cheap firearms if you just consider functionality, but I don't consider them to punch above their weight class. Like a Taurus, a Geese, whatever. Like they are what they are. They deliver a decent amount for a decent price, but I wouldn't consider them any better than they're priced. Personally. A High Point. They're very affordable. They're actually really reliable, but I don't consider them to really be a step above what they are advertised to be, which is a good, cheap, affordable, reliable American-made handgun. I'm going to start off with one that I think is very well representative of this class. That's the Walther PPQ. I actually forgot about this gun until the other day. I have a good buddy who used to work under me. I was the commander of the tactical team. He was one of our team leaders, a professional gunfighter. Now he works, let's just say, some more covert stuff for the federal government. I don't think that's being too specific. And he also shoots competition. He recently did when I asked him, because I knew that he had Glocks and an STI or a Staccato, I forget which. I asked him which he shot in competition. He said he shot his Walther PPQ. And I was like, yeah, I forgot about that gun. This is a gun that is nowhere near the cost of an STI 2011, but absolutely shoots like a much higher end gun. Maybe not as good as a 2011, but really, really good. And they're phenomenal as far as like the weight goes. I'm looking at their 4-inch, which would be right around their Glock 19-ish size, 24.5 ounces, much better ergonomics. And for whatever reason, they seem to shoot really soft. I'm not a physicist. Every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. There's a difference, though, between actual recoil numbers and felt recoil. Some guns can seem to recoil much harder than they actually would suggest by the numbers, and some seem to recoil much softer. These Walthers, in my opinion and in my experience, tend to recoil pretty soft. So if that's like you want a lightweight gun that you would carry that you might use for duty, you want something a little bit racier, than, let's say, a Glock. Yeah, the Walther PPQ, it's one of these guns that punches above its weight class, I think. They do have like the interchangeable backstrap. They come in different colors, which I like. I'm not a fan of black. Here's the thing. I will generally conceal carry. Unless you normally wear black, and I don't like wearing black. It doesn't blend in with much of anything, despite what tactical 80s movies would have you believe. So I don't like to wear it, and I don't like black guns if I can get pretty much any other color. They have them in OD green, they have them in tan. Here's the one issue for me. They have a fairly long trigger reach. Longer than I would prefer, and I don't want to get into all that entails. I've done a whole video on gun fit. But that is a one drawback. If you have medium hands, let's say average-ish size hands, I would not recommend them. But if not, then yeah, they can be a good gun. They make the 5-inch. If you're looking for what I would consider 5-inch as a full-size gun. Good gun. The Walther, and this may be one that he had. I don't remember. I thought he said PPQ, but he may have said the Q5 match. The Q5 match, if you don't know, probably I should have included in an episode. I don't know if it'll come out before or after this, but crossover guns. A great gun that would be good for a carry gun and a competition gun. But the Q5 match is a really nice gun. They also make a steel frame. So if you're one of the guys that, to you, plastic just doesn't do it for you. When I was a cop in California, I had a really good friend who became my roommate who was a sheriff. He became a sheriff after I was a cop. His dad was, I think, a sheriff or a police officer before him. I forget which, in that same area. His dad would often come say hi when I was sitting in the patrol car. And I think I carried an M&P at the time. And he was like one of the old school guys. And I knew he was a good guy. I knew he was ragging on me. But he's like, don't forget that gun on the dash. It'll melt. And I still kind of remember that. He's since passed on, but I hope that his son is doing well. We haven't really stayed in touch. But if Brian ever listens to the podcast, miss you, buddy. Anyway, to some people, just plastic frame guns just aren't as good as metal frame guns. The Q5 match, if you want kind of the similar modern advantages of the polymer striker fired gun, but you don't actually want polymer, then there you go. The Q5 match. That's a good one. I even see one listed on their website called the Black Diamond. Looks fancy. Does it shoot any better than a regular Q5? That I don't know about. But Walther, I think, is often forgotten. That makes me think of another one. The PK380. It's like a better shooting 380 than most. Most 380s are these little teeny tiny, they serve a purpose, but like a vest pocket gun. Like we're talking like a Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 380 or fairly common Ruger LCP in 380. If you want like a really good soft shooting, bigger, like it's not a pocket gun, but a big, softer shooting 380 for just a female shooter, or you want a still fairly small gun, but that would run like a full-size 9mm or similar to it, that PK380. It's a pretty nice gun. You're probably familiar with the Walther PPK. It's kind of one of their iconic guns, but that's really old technology, and those guns are pretty heavy for a not that small 380. You might look at the PK380. It's a little bit more modern and really shootable 380. Punches above its weight class, I think, which makes me think of another one. Kind of a linear progression here, but the Beretta 84s. The Beretta 84s, they just came out with a new one that's optics ready, but if you have ever handled these, they are quite a cut above most other 380s, and that's what I'm talking about, punching above their weight class. I mean, there's almost no comparison between those, and except for the caliber between those and a Smith & Wesson Bodyguard or Ruger LCP. So if you've decided on 380, you even get a little bit more velocity than you get out of a lot of those really teeny tiny guns. But yeah, for sure, the Beretta 84s, they're fantastic guns that punch above their weight class. Thus far, we've only talked about handguns. I was thinking about what other categories, and shotguns. Stoger in particular. Stoger shotguns. The Stoger shotguns they're not a Benelli, right? I love my Benelli M2. I'm very blessed to have one. I've had several Benellis over the years. I'm not a gun collector. I would consider kind of my best do-it-all shotgun. Maybe not even my grab-and-go apocalypse long gun, but my best do-it-all shotgun, the one that's coming with me, I believe, to Alaska, by God's grace, at the end of the week. The Benelli M2. It's not a Benelli, but they don't cost anywhere near a Benelli, and they're pretty close. If it's going to be your one end-of-the-world gun, I would say, yeah, save up and get the Benelli. But if you want to get into, let's say, 3-gun, they have a model. If, you want a decent over and under, they have a model. I would really consider the Stoeger. I like their operating system. I've been impressed with Stoeger quality over the years. You really might look at the Stoeger shotguns. I think depending on what flavor you want the 3-gun kind of version. You want a waterfowl hunting gun. You want an over and under, fine double gun, upland bird. They probably have a model, and it's probably pretty good and punches above its weight class. I'm looking at their 3-gun model here, and it's got a lot of really cool stuff on it. It's got the oversized controls that a lot of times you would pay extra for. My Benelli didn't even come with those. Also, comes with a shim kit, and a shim kit so you can fit the stock better to yourself. Again, it's something I would expect on a higher class of gun. So you see that here, and that's pretty cool. Likewise, the CZ Bob White. The CZ Bob White, if you don't know, is a really elegant double gun. And if you don't know about double guns, like over and under, side by side, sometimes you can get into the tens of thousands of dollars. Well, the CZ Bob White is a good handling little gun if you're looking for a nice upland game, classic looking shotgun that doesn't cost tens of thousands of dollars. At least not at the time of this recording. With inflation, who knows? But the CZ Bob White, if you're looking for a more classic double gun, for quail, for pheasant, for things like that, they had made a little 28 gauge. I forget if it was the Bob White or another model, but I picked that thing up and it was so cool. Really cool little gun. Light, handy, a gun you're going to carry around in the field a lot. They're just really cool. So if you're looking for one of those that punches above its weight class, the CZ Bob White is a good gun. Now, if we transition over to the rifle world, I'm going to talk about the Ruger M77, the Ruger Hawkeye. Not the cheapest gun. You might think, well, why not the Ruger American? Well, because that's their budget rifle, and I think you get a budget rifle. You get another push-feed gun with a usually plastic stock that does what it does. They're okay guns. But if you want something that's really nice, like a controlled round feed, Mauser / pre-64 Winchester type action, that's still not crazy expensive, the Ruger Hawkeye, it's a good gun. Especially if you want a good stainless steel gun that's still classic. Again, if you just want the bottom of the barrel cheap push feed gun, there's a bunch of those, and you get what you get. I'm not saying they're not a good value, but they're kind of in that class. The Tikka T3, the Ruger American, they're fine guns. But if you want a gun that costs a little bit more, but I think you get a lot more, especially if it's a serious hard hunting gun, a dangerous game rifle. Look at something like a Ruger Hawkeye African or Alaskan or guide gun. Just, you're getting so much more. You can do a lot to those like Ruger Americans, but it's never going to be that. It's never going to be a controlled round feed, really good, like the kind of gun I would think about handing down generation to generation. And kind of in that role, if you're looking for kind of a good do-it-all rifle, it's not called the Hawkeye, but it's very much based on that old M77 action, a really good controlled round feed action, and that's the Ruger Scout rifle. You can get it in the good, pretty laminate wood. You can also get it in the more traditional wood stock. Again, not a budget gun, but it's a nice gun. They're a nice gun. I think they really punch above their weight class for what you're getting. How about a SIG 226? Everybody's crazy right now for the M17s, for polymer striker fire guns. What's the coolest, latest, greatest polymer striker fire gun? One has more features, for $40 less. That seems to be where a big chunk of the market is. What about ye old, really good combat handgun, the SIG 226. They still make this 226. They make several different models, but just a basic model. Again, it's not a budget gun, but they're really, really good. If you want like a bug-out handgun, a bug-out bag handgun, a really good full-size combat handgun, they're that. They are that. And with some of these Guccified polymer striker-fired handguns, you can start getting into the cost, especially after you modify them to give them a decent trigger and whatnot, up to the cost of a SIG 226. You could just get a SIG 226. They are really a good gun. And I think right now underappreciated. So, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I think they punch above their weight class for what you're giving up for what you're getting. Just a good gun. Good steel slide, good barrels, good alloy frames, combat proven, rugged, reliable. Just a good gun. Anyway, with that, guns that punch above their weight class. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. More of just a lighthearted gun chat, maybe guns you're interested in. I try to cover a little bit of a different spectrum of guns, not just tactical, not just hunting. But hopefully you enjoyed this episode. If you did, if you're a regular listener, if you haven't scrolled down on Spotify or iTunes or whatever app, if you can, scroll down and hit some stars. I don't know how, but somehow it's supposed to help. And iron sharpens iron. You know, blessings are meant to be shared. If you like this podcast, if it was a blessing to you, hopefully you scroll down and hit some stars so it can reach more people and be a blessing to more people. That's it for today. That's all I'm going to plug. Just hit some stars if you haven't already. With that, the tactical tip of the day. Recently got asked by one of the patrons in the Patreon chat about, I forget if they were talking about like a pellet pistol or a BB pistol, there's a difference, or an airsoft gun, but any of those, all of the above, they're good for training. They asked if they had any training value, and they do. Ironically, when I was in the military, sometimes stationed on a base and was into competition shooting, you're not supposed to just have guns. Ironically, a military base was one of the places I couldn't train well with a firearm. But there was really no restriction on those kind of things. And I once trained in a rather long school for the Army, and I wasn't allowed to have an actual gun. So I went to, I think, Walmart and bought a couple of these kind of guns and trained with them. And then right after that, like the day after I flew back, there was a major competition, and I got West Coast champion. It was a West Coast regional match. I think everywhere from like the bottom of California up to Alaska and over to Montana. I got first place in that. I had only been dry firing with these kind of guns. Absolutely, they can work. So if you want a good training aid, if you're going to a non-permissive environment where you can't have a gun, but you could train with, let's say, an airsoft gun, and you don't even have to actually shoot the airsoft rounds, whatever those are called. You have to actually shoot any projectiles. If you are good enough to know how to call your shots and train your draw and things like that, absolutely, they're a fantastic training aid. If you're doing stuff like CQB and ground fighting, which I highly recommend, and you don't want to ground fight with your $1,000 combat handgun, I could see why. You can do the ground fighting and stuff with these kind of guns, commonly referred to as blue guns, whether they're blue or not, or if you're going to be doing the ground fighting stuff, obviously no projectiles, no CO2, none of the gas or anything like that, but just an inert platform. Like no gas, no CO2, nothing like that, no projectiles. But if you want to train CQB with something like that in a safe manner, doing the ground fighting, doing the grappling, gun takeaways, gun retentions, absolutely, they can be a phenomenal training aid. So if you don't have anything like that, I'm looking at what I call my zombie gun. It's made by Cold Steel. It's basically just a rubber 1911. I've used that so many times in training, like CQB, room clearing, things like that, where it's about footwork and tactics and logistics and things like that. Yeah, absolutely a good training aid. And a thanks for the patron for reminding me, asking that question, because a lot of times you're in the industry for decades, you forget things like that. You just take it for granted that people know. It's a good question, and yes, they are good. That's your tactical tip of the day. For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and you are complete in Him. I repeat, and you are complete in Him. Don't fall into some vain consumerism. There can be real advantage to moving to a nicer gun, a different gun, a gun for certain applications, but it's not going to make your life complete. Adding stuff to your Amazon, clicking and buying. You don't buy your way into happiness. If you have an empty, hollow life, you're just going to have an empty, hollow life with a bunch of stuff in it. You are complete in Him. You find meaning for your life in Him. You find purpose for your life in Him. Christ and Christ alone is our Savior. We were made for more. Other verse, deep calls unto deep. This earth is a temporary respite for us. You were made for more. You are complete in Him. Don't lose sight of what's important, men. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.